Welcome to our podcast, Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. From the place where schizophrenia and real life collide. East Coast, West Coast, Middle America. With Miriam Feldman, Mindy Greiling, and Randy Kay. Finally, a place to talk about the truth. You know, when mental illness happens, it happens to the whole family. If it happened to your family, did you go to your house of worship for help? And if so, what happened? Tonight, we'll be talking to a pastor and a rabbi. It doesn't cover all religions, but it's a start. And we'll ask and we'll answer questions. So welcome to Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. This is episode 44, I believe. And since we're all here, I want to start by introducing our two guests. We have Reverend Mariah Furness Tollgaard, who's a pastor. Pastor Mariah, what is your congregation's name?
I am the pastor of Hamlin Church United Methodist in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Okay, thank you. And we have my rabbi, Rabbi Evan Schultz, and you can tell us our congregation.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I serve as the senior rabbi of Congregation B'nai Israel in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Okay, so welcome to both of you. If you're new to the podcast, Mimi and Mindy and I are each moms of happens to be sons with schizophrenia. We are authors of books, memoirs, and more information about the subjects. And we found part of our peace by being mental health advocates and activists and podcast hosts. So tonight, talking about faith traditions and mental illness, how can clergy and congregations help? So welcome, both of you. I just want to start with a brief story, and I think the rest of our stories will come out. So I've been a member of my congregation where Rabbi Evan is our rabbi for a long time, since my son is 6, my son whom I call Ben in my book. And I have to say that when we were going through the initial stages of not knowing what was wrong, you were not the rabbi, Evan, but I don't think our rabbi knew what to tell me. I just got the impression he didn't know quite what to do with the problem. It was hard to find things, in my estimation, in the Bible to support me. But he learned from me as well as me learning from him. And he tried and brought it up. And very soon the congregation had a mental health panel that they invited people to. And this Friday, I'm going to be the speaker for Mental Health Awareness Month at my congregation. So I think we're all learning from each other. Mindy and Mimi, can you just say briefly what your experience with a house of worship has been regarding the family issue with mental illness, or did you not even bother? Mindy?
So I would just like to welcome Pastor Mariah personally, because she is my pastor, and we've had wonderful ministers at our Methodist church, but certainly on many scores, and especially on the topic of mental illness, she is the best we've ever had. I have to say that she did a series on the elephants in the room, and mental illness was one of those. She interviewed me. They had a book event just recently. Our associate pastor talked about her own depression, and that included cutting. Mariah has talked about her thoughts of suicide at a younger age. So we are like ideal and couldn't be better right now. But Ray's asking about when Jim was first sick and first diagnosed. And we had a wonderful minister then too. He visited Jim in the psych ward. He was very caring. And Mariah already knows this story, but when I called Roger, my husband actually called the church about putting Jim on the list that was in the hospital, the minister said that he would do that happily, don't worry, he wouldn't tell anyone that what the topic was, what he was sick with.
Okay, your sound is cutting out quite a bit,
and
Mindy.
That
so
just
could you say that last last thing again, because your sound is cutting out quite a bit.
I will try it again. You know, my computer crashed, and so I am on Roger's computer, which obviously isn't as good as mine. It doesn't have very good sound.
Okay, so if you just say the last bit of your story again, and we have to move on. So just tell us.
Yes. So the nut of it was that the minister put Jim on the prayer list, being in the hospital for the first time with mental illness, a psychotic episode, and said, "Don't worry, I won't say what it's for." And so that I thought was, buying into the silence of mental illness. And I think he meant it in a very kind way, however.
Absolutely. Thank you. Mimi, how about you?
Well, my family, we have two religions in my family, and it's kind of ambiguous in terms of what everybody is. So we don't, we're not associated with the house of worship. Though I do remember when Nick was first sick, he went to the Catholic church in our neighborhood to talk to the priest. Nick's illness has had a lot of tinges of, religiosity of his own in there. And when you read through his writings, it's all there. And so he's reached out and gotten, comfort and help, as one would hope. And that was really lovely.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to read some statistics and then get to the first question. And I will add for Pastor and Rabbi that I know that you have each mentioned a bit about in your congregation, you've dealt with depression and bipolar and anxiety. We each have sons with schizophrenia. So that makes it a horse of a different color, as they say, although it's a similar color. And my experience has been that is the most difficult mental illness to offer comfort for, because it's not a mood disorder. But in terms of statistics, is what interesting. This is from Lifeway Incorporated. Only a quarter of churches have a plan to assist families affected by mental illness, according to pastors. Clearly not true for either one of you, but I just thought I'd throw that out there for the listeners. And only about 21% of family members are aware of a plan in their church. I do remember going for help 20 some odd years ago and finding pamphlets for everything in the waiting area except mental illness. And I hope that has changed. 2/3 of pastors say their church maintains a list of local mental health resources, but few families are aware of that. So maybe you can tell us how to be aware. So, as a faith leader, and I'll just ask you one at a time, are you aware about mental health issues, especially serious mental illness in your congregants? And how do you become aware of that? Rabbi, I'll start with you.
Sure. For sure, it definitely, I've found more and more people are sort of approaching the clergy to talk about mental illness in their family and their lives. Especially, I've seen more parents sort of coming to us, parents of children, parents of teens who are going through, struggling with mental illness, dealing with SMI. So we are aware, I think probably as you've seen, Randy, one of our clergy team, also very publicly kind of spoke about her mental illness with the congregation, to take a little time off. And I think that also kind of helped to give other people license or have them sort of feel seen in our community. So I'd say it's definitely, in my time, I've been in this role now 3 years, more and more folks definitely are, I think, feeling comfortable, and we've kind of also extended the invitation for people to come and to talk with us about mental health issues in their lives.
Okay, thank you. Pastor?
Yeah, similarly. I mean, I think that mental health touches so many aspects of ministry these days, whether it is, families coming in, the Rabbi was talking about, just wanting to kind of tell you where they're at and what's happening in their life or with their child. We are across the street from a university. So a lot of the young adults that I work with there have come to me and are telling me some aspect of what's going on in their life and are looking for support, or maybe just some new resources. And also, being in a fairly urban context, we have a lot of folks who walk in off the street and have on a couple of occasions found ourselves in the midst of a major mental health crisis. And that's not with their family members. That's folks often who are unhoused. Perhaps there's other drug and alcohol issues going on as well. And and kind of become a first stop until we can get the mental health team there, or next level of support.
So, so what do you do if in that case, somebody walks in?
It often depends on what's going on in the day. We have a preschool in our church, and so we have to make sure that everybody's safe. We had a situation this summer where a woman was wandering in the parking lot half naked. It was 20 below or in the winter, as it is in January in Minnesota. And we invited her inside. And as we were trying to kind of de-escalate and figure out what was going on, fortunately, it was the day there was a lot of staff there. So the other pastor and I could kind of swap in and out. And we called our county mental health support. She refused to talk to them on the phone. It took over 2 hours for somebody to come to help us. And even from there, she wouldn't go with them. And so we had to kind of keep going until eventually the police came and they couldn't take her. And so it was heartbreaking. I mean, it was the middle of winter and she just kind of had to let her go.
Wow. You just had a taste of what families like ours go through quite often. Quite often. What was this was this part of your training, your pastoral training? Like, I know you both trained in that. Did they bring this up at all, Rabbi?
A little bit part of our training. It's interesting. Like, I was, kind of thinking back on my experiences and preparing for tonight. A lot of our training more is about sort of like physical illness, responding in that way. I do. Many of us do a chaplaincy work for a semester or a summer at local hospital. I was at NYU Hospital, and almost all of that training was around responding to people who are going through various physical illness. I walked the cancer floor. I walked people who were preparing for surgery, and there was not very much training around mental health issues. Certainly in that year of chaplaincy, we talk about it a little bit. We do have classes around pastoral care and that kind of work, and I think it's more and more it has been being talked about, being discussed in our rabbinic circles, in clergy circles. But yeah, I was ordained 10 years ago this past weekend, and I will say, much more of the focus was on physical rather than mental health, and I'm glad. I think it's changing.
Thank you, Pastor.
Yeah, in my divinity school, it wasn't part of our spiritual care and counseling sort of course, but similarly, again, to the rabbi, I did some time in as a hospital chaplain, and didn't talk about it a lot there, but I actually did an additional summer internship in a mental health hospital in Boston. And so I learned a lot. I don't feel like anyone was instructing me as much as like, go on in. But there I was really grateful to learn alongside the health professionals who live it day in and day out. And I think as I've gone on, I've sort of sought out additional education and resources, and certainly learned from folks along the way, like Mindy and her family, and the stories that they've shared. And in fact, I've had times when I've referred people to Mindy or asked, here's somebody in this situation, and what can we do? And so I think we kind of have to cultivate our own resources.
Yeah, it's sort of.
I'm kind of inhibited about talking tonight because if my sound isn't very good. But one time when Jim was in the psych ward, he called for the hospital chaplain to come and talk to him, because he thought his thoughts were that he was going to hell. So he wasn't calling for prayers or something like that. He wanted to debate the philosophies of life, and did you go to hell, and was he going to hell, and that sort of thing. Did that ever happen to you, Mariah, when you were a hospital chaplain? Were you ever called to the psych ward to talk to people who were delusional? And often religiosity is part of that.
Yeah, definitely. And that mix of wanting to kind of have the debate and also trying to decipher what are they actually thinking, or where did they get these ideas from, and try to say, well, that's, really not what I think, but it's hard. It's like there's not when there's not a, as we would say, come to Jesus moment where we all agree in the end, right? As much as trying to just kind of be a person to listen and
and then another question I have for both of you is, have you seen any progress, like in the last 10 years, in terms of families being open to come to you and share, or is it about the same?
I guess we'll
That's a good
call on
point.
somebody. Rabbi?
Yeah, I guess it's probably easier to call on us. Yeah. Than
I can see you. You can raise your hand or just,
Yeah, I think so for sure. We've also in our synagogue recently, we started a small groups initiative around all kinds of different topics and issues. And we recently started a mental health advocacy and awareness group. I've sort of reached out personally to a lot of people who I know might wish to be in that group. They're who are being sponsored. Randy coming to speak at our service and dinner this Friday, which we are so grateful to Randy. It's been an incredible resource, certainly to me and our newer congregation over the years. And I think we try to be really, as clergy, intentional about our language when we talk about sort of healing and illness. So, for example, in our prayer services, we say a prayer for healing. And traditionally, sort of when I was growing up, it was always the rabbi, the clergy would always sort of talk about physical healing. People who are sick and with various physical illness. And we've sort of been very intentional when we say those who are with physical illness, mental, emotional, spiritual, and to say the names of all of those people. And I think even little changes in language like that, including those sort of words in our prayers, those help people feel seen. Those, sometimes we'll say, yeah, thank you just for saying mental illness, and that we can say someone's name who has mental health issues. So those sorts of things, I think, has helped sort of create pathways for people to come and speak with us and seek our care.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's been a lot of progress made on language and awareness, and I feel like often in my preaching there might be almost a disclaimer, if where we'll make sure that if I'm talking about hope or healing, recognizing sometimes we need additional medical resources or support, or take to go to a professional for mental health issues. And I think that there are also a lot of mainline Protestant denominations in particular that have like mental health awareness Sunday or month, or just lots of additional tools that are out there, and a lot of prayers and liturgy being written around the topic. And so I think it is easier for people to come when they know that is in the language of our faith tradition now.
I talked to a friend of mine who's a social worker right now in the St. Paul Public Schools, but at one time she was a social worker in the emergency room. And when I told her the topic for this podcast tonight, she said, and I'm thinking you two are not the culprits, but she said often when she was in the emergency room, the clergy would come with the family and be strongly advising them against taking any medication that the doctors might prescribe. And this friend of mine also has a son with schizophrenia, so she's sees the benefit of medication. But have you ever encountered that in your working with other churches, or hasn't that come up about anti-medication? In other words, you should pray about the problem instead of taking medication. And if it's not working, then you should pray harder.
Oh, that's a loaded question. And after that one, Mimi's got one, but yeah, but that's not even on our list. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that certainly there are, I'm sure, many Christian traditions that would likely espouse that kind of viewpoint, or have, think of healing as something that is of God alone, and wouldn't or would advise against additional support and resources. I think of just this year, I was a part of 2 end-of-life situations for adult men with schizophrenia in their 50s. And I was supporting the mom and grandma in one case. And that was a whole different generation of folks. I mean, these women were in their 80s. And, as they talked about their son's stories, and they were not completely independent of each other, but similarly had faith experiences growing up where it was sort of like, can't you fix him, or to church to be fixed or healed. And some of it was just desperation of trying anything. And sometimes people would go to churches that promised healing or casting out of demons. But I think we've come a long way in most churches recognize the value of the medical resources and medications available.
Is there a Jewish point of view,
Yes.
Rabbi? Or I mean, not that you're speaking for all Jews, but I mean,
Yeah, no, very much in line as well. Yeah, I know. I mean, I think there are perhaps certain very traditional streams of Judaism that may kind of take that approach, but certainly for us, I don't get asked very often my opinion on medication or those sorts of questions. But for sure, we're of the Reform Jewish tradition, and fully advocate for any sort of medical, medical support, medical advancements that are out there to help people find healing. I know people, I think come to more with their struggles about, why this might be happening to them, trying to understand God, where's God's role in this, or was there something that they did that may have brought them to this place? So engage with people in conversation, sort of more spiritually, and trying to kind of for themselves to understand. What's
your answer? What is, Mimi has a question, but then I want to double back to this, if you will, because I'm curious about how your faith helps you answer questions like that. So let's put that in the parking lot, as they say. Mimi, what did you have to ask?
Well, I'm thinking about this connection between religiosity and SMI, because when my son first got sick, one of the things that we noticed, because I had really no familiarity with serious mental illness until that happened, was this theme that runs through so many refrains of people with serious mental illness, that God is talking to them, or God is telling them what to do, or they're talking to God. And I remember at one point saying to my husband, what if it's true? What if God is talking to them? What if they're on some highly evolved level that us plebeians aren't on? Who's to say? How do we even know? And even though I'm not a big believer, I took some comfort in that. But then as time went on, I started thinking about the in ancient times or older times, people who behaved like my son behaves, or people with schizophrenia behave, were often regarded as shamans or seers or holy men. And then when you take a deeper dive and you think about the history of religion, surely so many of these characters or deities or people who were supposedly deities in the history of religion exhibited clearly schizophrenic symptoms. So I wonder what people of God think about that. I mean, do you think it's possible? Is it something you've ever thought of? Or,
why is it always that they're talking to God?
Okay, Pastor, I'll let you talk.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Yeah. Oh, no, yeah. No, just.
Unless you have an idea, Rabbi.
Oh, no, I haven't had Pastor. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's good to
yeah,
call
yeah.
us, whoever you want to kind of speak. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe. I think that, I believe that God is especially with people who suffer, and that I believe in a God who brings to the center those who are hurting and in need of, for whatever circumstance, that need extra support. And so it could very well be that there is some higher level, connection there, or just maybe in those moments, people with suffering from SMI are able to kind of get out of their own way and hear God differently in ways that the rest of us can't, because we're all so consumed with whatever else is happening in our lives and in the world. I think that there's kind of a litmus test there, because if God is, or whatever that spiritual being is, speaking to or through you, and there is harm involved, or something that is
Tricky.
unloving, or something that would be harmful to other people or to creation, I don't think that is of God. But certainly, I think you're exactly right, Miriam, and lots of mystics and saints and certainly biblical characters there. You probably would wonder what other levels of mental health things might be going on in their divine experiences.
I often used to say if we were in some tribe somewhere, my son might be the medicine man, but we're not.
Yeah.
We're in Fairfield County, Connecticut, and he can't function in this world with what goes on in his head. And I'm forever grateful that whatever he hears doesn't take the form of violence. But what families live with, we never know what the voices in their head that they say they don't hear. We never know what they're going to tell them. In Mindy's book, she talks about Jim taking a very, very, very long walk because his voices were telling him to kill his mom, and he didn't want to. So he took a 36-hour walk, Mindy, was it? Something like that.
Well, yeah, I think it was quite a long time. I'd have to look up the exact number of hours. But the point is, he bumped past me and ran off to do that walk, which I was grateful for when I found out later why he did it.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I'm going to skew the question just slightly differently, because I don't think I think we've made the point about this is the world that it is. But I'm curious for each of you, and Rabbi Evan, I'll start with you. When you go to comfort a family or advise a family, or I know you listen, but is there anything in the Bible or in the faith literature, and Pastor, you're dealing with, the Old Testament and the sequel, and we're dealing with the Old Testament and the Talmud. So, and that's like opinions about everything basically. But are there passages in the Bible that help you comfort families or help them make sense of it? Like, where is it mentioned? Rabbi?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was doing a little text learning kind of in preparation for tonight. There are not a ton of texts that sort of speak directly in our tradition to mental health issues, or the ones that do are not ones I particularly want to share or feel particularly proud of.
No helpful texts. Okay.
Yeah, not particularly helpful. So, but there are certain texts that, I think when you zoom out, can be really helpful. I mean, just the text from Genesis, and sort of that each human being was created in the divine image, and sort of I'm always so drawn to that. Yeah, for people who are kind of struggling or questioning or asking, say, each human, there's this divine spark in each human being. Kind of mirroring to what you were speaking about, and that to me. We lost.
Nope, she'll come back.
Oh, okay. Those texts, I think, to just kind of affirm to them that, yeah, your family or you are like deeply loved, and you have the reflection and spark of the divine within you, or your your child or your parent or your brother or your sister, really carries that. And then I sort of go from there. And in a lot of ways, that just beginning that is sort of reassuring to folks to, and then you could sort of, look at some of the texts that are not helpful and sort of say, well, how maybe could this have, this biblical character.
Can you give us an example of something you found that you feel wasn't
it's not so helpful? There's sort of a famous one, there's, kind of a famous one. This is in the book of Samuel, and Hannah is, this is not about mental illness, but this is just how not to talk to people, I guess. But she's sitting on the steps of the temple and she's praying, and like it's this beautiful prayer. We read it actually on our High Holy Days in our synagogue. She's like praying to God in a way that like was not seen before in the Bible. And this Eli the priest comes up to her and accuses her of being intoxicated because of how she's speaking and how she's praying. You look at the text and you think, wow, someone is sort of like in this deep space of prayer. She's praying to God, sitting on the step, and this is in the book of prophets. And that's how someone sort of looks at her and speaks to her and, accuses her. So texts like that, and you sort of say, well, how, that was especially as a religious leader, and you see someone who is, deep in prayer and in pain, and, how that's sort of a lesson oftentimes in how not to speak to others who are sort of in that space and in that place.
Thank you. Pastor? I know you dropped out there for a minute, so
we have storms coming in, I think. So
So the question is just about in your religious texts, are there passages that you go for comfort when you're speaking to comfort families who are going through this?
Yeah. I mean, I think certainly and overarchingly is that we are all created in the image of God, and starting with Genesis, and everything that God created is good, and that we are all beloved children of God. And so that's kind of always the foundation. I think that, there certainly are stories in the New Testament about about demons and casting off of demons. I wouldn't recommend that to people, but I think often what that brings up the conversation is, what was the context? What was going on at the time? What's the bigger picture? How do we understand these things differently now? And because I think some of those kinds of stories at their sort of face value, literal read, can be damaging and harmful to people, versus if we kind of understand, a little bit more of the historical context and what people were dealing with and grappling in their understanding of health at that time, that it kind of broadens it, and to see that, God's greatest desire for us is to live abundant life, to live as fully as we can. And so what are the tools and the resources that are disposable to make that possible for anybody to the best ability that they can live that full life.
Thank you.
And I saw the movie The Exorcist long ago. You mentioned casting out demons, Mariah. I just thought it was a horror movie, but now I haven't watched it for a long time, but I think that young woman probably was coming down with schizophrenia. I'd have to watch it again to see that. Jim sometimes wishes he was a shaman or somebody revered. He thinks if he was in another culture or another time, then he would be very special. And I'm on the NAMI Ramsey County board, an affiliate of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And we have a woman on there who is Hmong, whose sister has a mental illness. And in that culture, her sister is considered chosen, whether she wanted to be or not. She's revered and taken care of, and everybody thinks she's special. But it concerns her sister, who is a social worker, that part of that care is not medication. So there's just a lot of nuances with religion and care for people and how we treat them.
Thank you. I would like to ask you guys if there are questions you would like to ask us. Now, obviously, Pastor, you know Mindy, and Rabbi, you know me. Mimi, it lives on the West Coast, all up and down the West Coast. And so is there anything you'd like to know from us about what we wish houses of worship would be able to do? I don't know. Do you have any questions that we can answer for you?
And Mimi
Yeah.
can go first, and she's not one of the congregants.
Well, I'm actually asking the rabbi and the pastor if they want to ask us. Oh, and,
Well,
and Mimi can go first when answering. Yep, got it. Okay.
Yes.
How can we
Yeah.
help you understand us?
I mean, I think I would be curious, going back to that sort of initial diagnosis or those early days when someone maybe first goes to their clergy person, what kind of response would be most valuable to you? I know sometimes I think like, oh, go to the resources, but they probably have, lots of other resources and deeper resources than I can offer. But also, I mean, how can I, as a pastor, respond? But also, how can I help our faith community respond? There's a colleague of mine who talks about mental health or mental illness as the no casserole illness. People don't show up at your door with casseroles, and so I would like to learn how to lead my congregation in better responding.
That's great.
What I would say to that is, it's the same answer that is the answer to so many questions about mental illness and how we can make it better. And that is talk about it. We got to talk about it. And not say, oh, I won't mention that he's sick with mental illness because everybody would be embarrassed like the pastor before you did. Because the thing is, we've got to make a place for this in our world. We've taken this large segment of our population and said, you don't get to be part of the world. And we've shoved them into the margins. And I think that the houses of worship, if you talked about it and included it and made it just part of life, which it is, because believe me, once you're the parent of somebody with SMI, you realize there is not a family out there that isn't touched by this in some way. It's just nobody's talking about it. So I would say talk about it. And then the other thing that I think would be really helpful is, at one point with my son, he was getting, to years and years and years where he was doing better. And once again, no place for him in our culture, no place to hang out, to interact. Nobody wants to have anything to do with him. No one's showing up with the casseroles. And at that point, and I'm Jewish, I went to the local churches that were near where he lived to just see, is there a young adult group? Is there something he can participate in that will make him feel part of something? And there were some things, and then COVID happened. But I mean, that kind of stuff, that community outreach and connection and inclusiveness, because one of the worst results of mental illness is this isolation and this marginalization. And we need to open our arms and find a place for these people. And I think that the houses of worship could do a lot.
And I will say, I always think mentorship is really important. When Jim was first sick, I wanted to talk to people who had been through this. So I think churches could maybe have people, connected with others who have gone through this. As Mimi said, in the church, there's probably 20 people or more that are dealing with serious mental illness, but they don't know who each other is.
Or the stigma gets in the way.
Yeah.
Right. So I just think connecting people in the church would be my answer.
I think that's a great response. As we were going through, as you guys probably know, especially with schizophrenia, for many of us, the early stages are the most confusing because it can take 4 to 5 years to even know what it is. My first clue is when my son in Yom Kippur services, this was before your time, Rabbi Evan, was hanging out with the wrong girl, I thought, and they went and had pizza delivered to the temple during our big fasting days. So this was like not a teenage prank. It seemed like a teenage prank at the time, but it was very immature at best and a sign of an upcoming mental illness at worst. And so those confusing times. So I think even though you think we have resources, we don't have resources. They don't give us a handbook, what to do if your child develops a mental illness. It's not something, maybe more, it's a little more out there, I think. So it can be helpful to point people toward NAMI support groups, or to host a family to family in your house of worship, to let people know they're not alone. A lot of us don't want to talk because of stigma, but a book that really comforted me is by a rabbi, and it's very famous. It's called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And I don't really waste my time figuring out why my son is ill. It doesn't really help me. I think he has a place in this world. We all have a place in this world, but I'd give anything for him not to have this particular place in the world. That just, it's sad we just had a whole relapse today. And that's what I'm dealing with after, 6 months of relative success. Everything just fell apart today. So part of the reason it's the no casserole illness is that if somebody breaks their leg, you bring the casseroles until the leg heals, and then it's over, and then everybody gets back to normal. But families dealing with mental illness do not get to go back to normal. We get to go to a new normal. And if we're lucky, we might stay there. But I always say it's like a big game of chutes and ladders, only it's not fun, because we climb and we climb and we climb and we climb, and we draw the wrong card and we're back down to square two. And not just for us, but for my son, who was working full time. And then COVID hit and he lost his job, and boom, the 4 things we need were, structure, purpose, love, reason to get out of bed in the morning, were all knocked out from under him. And then he kicked out his own treatment, and then he was back in the hospital. So chutes and ladders. And that's part of the reason people may come, or you may come visit in the first psychiatric stay. But what if somebody's in the hospital for the 8th time? It's got to be hard for you to show up again. And I realize that. So I think in that book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, what sticks in my mind forever and ever was when man cries out in anguish, God sends other people. Mm-hmm. That is, I've always taken great comfort in that. So that this particular rabbi, I'm sure his son had an illness that made him age and die quickly. And he remembers the nurse that got his son a violin the right size for him. So congregations helping each other and, forming communities and being open about your stories. And that matters a lot. And saying those things, changing the language in the prayers, that matters a lot. So that's what I would say, that you're probably facing an obstacle with stigma in the way. But if families do need connection with other people, if there's a way to make that happen, or even having the brochures out there, along with, so you need a hip replacement, whatever those brochures are. But I haven't yet seen a brochure that says 1 out of 4 families deals with mental illness. Is yours one of them? Here's how we can help.
And my little theme song that I like to put in every now and then, I hate the word stigma. I actually call it discrimination, because people are treated differently in terms of benefits, laws, just how they're treated. And so I think that's a stronger word always. You can not do much about stigma. It's kind of what people think. But you can do something about discrimination and make sure people are treated the same. And if you have cancer, that can come back and people go to the hospital a second time. So I think it's, if we think of it as the word discrimination, we're more geared to make change.
Mm-hmm. So we're down to our last few minutes, and I always like to leave the last few minutes for anything we forgot to ask you, anything you would like to say, or anything else that you want to ask us about how maybe we as advocates can help you. Raise your hand if you have a final word all ready to say. There's 5 of us here, so I think I've spoken enough. And I'm going to call and there you go, Rabbi.
Being a faith leader, I brought a prayer. Yeah, if that's all right. This is from a really a nice resource from the Reformed Jewish tradition called "Where Healing Resides," and it's a book of prayers around all kind of illness. And there's a prayer of healing for mental illness. So I just thought I'd read the prayer from the book, if
that would be
all right.
lovely.
Be happy to send it to you or make it available to folks. I give this book out a lot to folks. So it says, "May the one who blessed our ancestors bless me with strength and healing as I struggle with emotional distress and mental suffering. May I walk in the footsteps of Jacob, King Saul, Miriam, Hannah, and Naomi, who lived with dark moods, hopelessness, isolation, and terror, but survived. They led our people. Just as our father Jacob spent the night wrestling with an angel and prevailed, may I be granted the endurance to wrestle with pain and prevail night upon night. Grant me the faith to know that though, like Jacob, I may be wounded, shaped, and renamed by the struggle, still I will live on to continue an ever unfolding, unpredictable path towards healing. May I not be alone on this path, but accompanied by family in all its forms, friends, caregivers, ancestors, and the divine presence. Surround me with loving kindness, grace, and companionship. Spread over me a Sukkot Shalom, a shelter of peace and wholeness." Amen.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to throw in a last word that I would like all faith leaders to know that families are suffering silently, and also that those of us, and this may be your story as well, Pastor, because I don't know your full story yet, but definitely with schizophrenia, a big symptom is something called anosognosia, which means they don't know that they're ill. So one of the hardest reasons that it's hard to treat is they don't want the help, because this is what happened to my son today. He's like, my mother's making me take meds. I don't need the help. I don't need your prayer. So that is something that just to be aware of that goes on in the minds of that half-naked woman that showed up. She didn't need the police. She didn't need the help. It is an actual symptom of the illness because the frontal lobes are impaired that they don't know they're ill. So I wanted to throw that out as kind of my last word. Do you have a prayer for us, Pastor?
I didn't have
Didn't prepare one, so I just wanted to give you a chance if you had one.
I did want to say thank you to all of you for what you're doing and for offering this podcast. I've listened to several episodes and referred people to it, and I think just again being a voice of experience and companionship for folks who find themselves either in this journey within their own family or wanting to learn more to support others. Thank you for what you do. It's so important. And also want to encourage folks to, reach out to your faith leader and talk to them about what they're offering in the church or, in their congregation and what perhaps they could do more of. Sometimes, I've had people reach out and say, this word that you use, that we don't say that anymore, that's offensive, or even those kinds of things. That's helpful. Most of us want to know and learn and do better, and so help us learn to support families better. So thank you.
Oh, well, I thank you both. And Rabbi, I'll see you Friday. And I really see, as a member of the congregation, all the work that's going into making things better for families like mine. And I love the opportunity. Mimi and Mindy, any last thing that you wanted to?
I just wanted to give a special thank you to Mariah, because I won't see her until, if all goes according to plan, till the fall, because she's on sabbatical and she made special time to be with us, even though she's already gone and not answering emails at the church and so forth. So thank you both for being here, and especially Mariah on her sabbatical. And then, if I might, speaking of being corrected on how things are said, we don't say that anymore. I just want to say, for podcast listeners, we were corrected, the three of us moms here, last time, or on our guest, because the guest was saying the mentally ill or schizophrenic people, and those are not things that we normally say. We didn't correct our guests, but I will just say thank you to the person who does have schizophrenia, who contacted us and said that is old-fashioned. So we all need correcting.
We all do. We all do. Thank you so much. This has been Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches, and one rabbi and one pastor opening the conversation about faith and help and congregations and serious mental illness. Thank you for joining us. Hey, thanks for joining us for this episode of Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches with Randy Kay, Mindy Greiling, and Miriam Feldman. To get in touch with us or to learn more about our books, please visit our websites at miriam-feldman.com, mindygreiling.com, or randyk.com.